somebody said it was 12. Let's say they said it was 20. Let's say they said it was 30. That's still justified. There's something from which I can derive that from. You, though, it's totally arbitrary. You have no actual idea why the age should be 18.
No, that's not for sexual consent.
Why it shouldn't be.
For sexual consent or for voting? Okay, for sexual consent because we look at what we consider an average age of sexual and societal maturity.
What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. You're just stringing a bunch of bullshit together.
Do you know what puberty is?
Mean?
I know I know that as someone who's still chain smoking like a hip 14-year-old that maybe this has eluded you, right? But
Andrew Wilson completely owns Rob Noer in the debate about Christian authoritarianism. Andrew Wilson obviously is on the side of Christian authoritarianism. Rob Noer is trying to argue against it. And this is a good debate, and this is a good showing by both gentlemen. And while I think this is a pretty good showing by both gentlemen here, no one looked particularly really stupid or anything like that. And while I like Rob Noer, in my opinion, I think Andrew Wilson did a little bit better in this debate. But don't just take my word for it. Watch the debate yourself and come to your own conclusions. By the way, this is a commentary video, not a clip re-upload video, so I will be interjecting with my commentary.
Fight started.
Yeah, I just cracked a fresh beer, real beer, not a White Claw, before I dismantle this absolute crock of horseshit that you all just heard. Let's start, Rob, with asking you a very basic question. Back in the Revolution, when there was a fight going on between this nation, which was not a nation at the time, but colonials, and King George, were they traitors or freedom fighters?
It depends on your perspective. For me, they're freedom fighters.
I'm asking, what's your perspective?
Freedom fighters.
They were freedom fighters from your perspective.
Yeah.
So would you say that who would be the conservatives, do you think?
It's a good question. I would say probably when it came to sort of religious beliefs, I would guess the UK. I'd guess Britain.
And they also were the status quo, right?
Correct.
They had the crown. They had the monarchies. They most certainly didn't have a progressive document like the Constitution. They were most certainly the conservatives of that conflict. Wouldn't you agree?
I would say in the literal sense of the word, yes. Now, a lot of the values that we consider conservatism, such as masculinity and things like that, were exemplified in the rugged sort of, spirit of the pioneers and of the people.
What do you mean? Nobody considers masculinity a conservative value, right? Conservative values are based around the conservation of something that's important.
You don't think that masculinity is something that should be conserved?
I think that the version of masculinity that you might espouse might be subjective in comparison to my own. I'm willing to yield that that's true. But what I'm not willing to yield is not true, is that there has to be something that conservatism is trying to actually conserve. In this case, I say that it's a value structure. You say it's a piece of fucking paper that a bunch of lunatic deists wrote, who were progressives for their time. They rebelled against the rightful authority of the crown. And there were loyalists inside of this nation who did not want that conflict. And what ended up happening is that you elevate these people, the progressives, by the way, by your own standard, and say that these people were freedom fighters, not that they were in rebellion against rightful authority.
But again, you're going to have the same problem. The authority that was in time at the time of King George would itself have been considered progressive from a perspective of 200 years prior to that. They engaged in more progressive politics than what the crown would have 200 years before.
Who was the king 200 years prior to that?
Some guy named Leo or some shit. I don't know.
Then, I mean, how do you know, if you don't know the standard, how do you know that it was a more progressive government?
Because
it was made it up, right?
No, define conservative based on your interpretation. What was the definition you gave?
Core value structure of which you try to conserve.
Right, maintaining the status quo.
Not always status quo.
But that's what you said.
It could be anything that is a conservation of something,
right.
Some type of culture, something.
So, for example, as people that were sort of nationalist in places that's the modern day UK started intermingling with societies such as, through the spice trade, through, go trade through Asia, through intermarriage through countries like Spain, France, other countries like that, then we could see that that was actually progressive, because a lot of the cultural values that would have been before people were expanding out into the world would have been changing. So from the same perspective, the argument that you're saying is that King George was conservative and we should have stuck with that. It's only because you're looking at it in one slice of time. 200 years previous to that, then it would have been considered that he was very progressive, because
externalities don't matter. It's not an externality as long as the core of whatever the conservation is there. Society's always going to have to march on with technology, with language, with various things. Those are externalities. The internality is the thing you're trying to conserve. So it doesn't matter if Yeah, it is true. It doesn't matter if the chapel has air conditioning in it now, as long as it espouses the same doctrine that it was trying to conserve. That's conservatism.
But that's not, but even based on, no one's suggesting that. That's straw manning what I'm saying. I'm not saying, well, they had more advanced architecture.
Then why are you only mentioning externalities?
It's not just externalities. For example.
Then what's the internality?
Internality could be all sorts of cultural values that we have, right? So there are, for example, I know the cultural values of the area I live today, right? So those values don't just include the holy text that we look at, but it also includes a way of life. So, for example, the Amish have a culture and that they're conserving that culture that's vastly different with my culture and your culture, right? Just because it occurs at the same time doesn't mean that they're not conserving their own type of culture. But even their culture might be considered progressive compared to what it would have been 100 years ago. The problem, what I'm saying is, it's not just that you're trying to make it like, well, as long as they said that they were sort of religious and that they had a religious leader, then that's conservatism. That's not true.
That's ridiculous.
Let me finish real quick. Britain, the Dark Ages in Britain and their understanding of how they viewed Christianity is different than King George's version of Christianity. And
those
many
weren't
people,
Dark Ages. That's made up tripe.
Go ahead.
That's progressive, made up fucking tripe. Those were not Dark Ages. Okay? There was a massive renaissance that has happened time and again throughout European culture. One was called the Renaissance period, in fact. Okay? The cultural conservation that Europe is going through, even right this second, the progressives consider this to be regressive, but it's not. It's just cultural emergence again. People trying to go back to some rooted culture that we've lost. That foundation of that culture was based on Christianity, both in Europe and here in the United States. Now, what I'm talking about specifically by the internality is that is what the preservation needs to be.
Do you find King George was...
Let me finish. I'm almost done. 1 second. When we go back to the original Constitution, how it was written, almost all of the things I would quote to you that have been changed inside the Constitution, you'd say those are good things. You would say those are good things.
Like what?
What's that? Like almost any amendment. You want women's suffrage, for instance, right?
Yeah, I don't mind it.
Okay, yeah, right.
What about the First Amendment? What about the Bill of Rights?
Just that, in and of itself.
You're against the Bill of Rights?
The Bill of Rights.
Right.
Some of it.
Like First Amendment?
The crucible symbol, the Andrew Wilson symbol shined up to the sky, and he was needed. Andrew Wilson going to fight crime right now, going to probably stop a mugger. He was needed by his own Commissioner Gordon. What do you guys think about this debate so far? I haven't chimed in as much because I actually like listening to both sides. This has been pretty good, but what do you guys think? Leave a comment in the comment section below. Give that like button a smash, a like, a tap, whatever you want to do. Just make sure it's liked if you're liking it. And by the way, these two related in any way? This dude down here, Casimir, he looks like he's like a parallel universe version of Rob Noer. Rob Noer got his parallel universe version to moderate this debate. That's pretty neat.
It looked like something came up. I won't speak on the topic. We'll leave him get back. So hopefully everything's all right.
I have paused the clock, so we may be.
Anyways, hi, Andrew's audience. I hope everyone's gearing up for a good Thanksgiving tomorrow. How about you, Casimir? You have a Thanksgiving dinner coming up?
Yes, I do.
I'm pumped. Normally I do home health care, so normally I work with people with developmental disabilities, and the holidays are brutal for them because a lot of people don't have families. So this will be like, I had 1 year like 2 years ago where I left my job briefly, but other than that, this will be the first year in 10 years that I actually get to spend Thanksgiving Day with my family. So I'm pumped because when I'm cooking the turkey, it's garbage. I'm a terrible cook, so I'll actually have a good dinner for once.
Well, that's fixable though.
Yeah. So, by the way, the debate we did, I am getting the thumbnail ready and stuff. I think that it's best to live stream it and then put it up like a week later, unless it's time sensitive. Everything all right, man? Nope. Everything all right?
Sorry about that.
Oh, no,
Yeah,
no problem.
everything's okay.
I mean, you have been known to get doxxed, or I mean, swatted. So I was like, fuck.
Yeah, I'm not going to get into it, but yeah, let's keep going.
All right. So again,
Talk.
okay, so what I'm saying is this is sort of a red herring anyways. I hope we get to the meat of it more. But again, like, you can't make the argument that King George was the most staunch religious, leader. He was considered secular, or would have been considered secular by leaders that came before him and possibly even after him. So the idea, just because they were more conservative because they were in a position of power and claimed to sort of be a religious country doesn't mean that it was conservative in all ways that we say. And other ways, it doesn't matter, because if the definition of conservative is things like, well, I find free speech to be progressive, I find the right to defend yourself to be progressive, I find, like, one of the things I've heard you say in the past that I think would be worth talking about is that as a married man, you cannot rape your wife. If that's progressive to say, I don't think you could rape, I think that you could still rape your wife, then that's fine. You could semantically call that progressive, but I would find in that institution, that specific action, which you would consider part of conservatism, to be reprehensible.
Okay, so let's try to move through this massive quantity of absolute hogwash. So first and foremost, when we're talking about the Constitution itself, the Constitution has multiple amendments to it since its inception. We were talking specifically about women's suffrage, for instance. Mm-hmm. Why do you think women should vote?
I think that we should, as the government, it should not have the right to discriminate based on immutable characteristics, such as sex.
Why not?
Because it shouldn't. If there's going to be discrimination,
wait, it shouldn't do it because it shouldn't do it. Yeah, that's
right. For the same reason,
Rob.
Right, for the same reason, because if we allow the government to make second-class citizens based on immutable characteristics, based on how they were born, then it justifies doing that based on any swath of issues, such as race.
I mean, if you consider that if some people can't vote, well, then they're second-class citizens. I just don't think that's a correct way to look at it. Because what you're essentially saying is voting is a human right, that we have a human right to vote. And where does that end? Should someone be able to come into our country and be able to vote as a human right? So I think that's an incorrect way of thinking. There's already people in our country who are not allowed to vote.
Do you think black people shouldn't be allowed to vote?
No.
Why?
Why? Well, so here's a consideration for justification. Before I move into why I think that, I still haven't actually heard the justification from you, except that you say that they're going to become a second-class citizen. So you're saying that what makes a first-class citizen is egalitarianism? We're all equal. We should all have equality across the board.
I think that when it comes, my delineation is quite clear. It's going to be much easier than your delineation, right? My delineation is quite simply that the government cannot offer different rights to people based on immutable characteristics such as race, sex, religious advocacy, and things of that nature. So that's my answer. Can you show me in
the Constitution where there's a right to vote for anybody?
I believe it only talks about landowners, right? I don't know specifically what part of the Constitution.
They're affirmed in the negative. So all the
it says which people
says. Oh no, all the Constitution says is that if there is a vote, if there is one, then you can't tell people that they can't vote. That's it. Okay. But the right is affirmed in the negative itself. There is no actual right to vote, and there never was supposed to be a right for everyone to vote. And why would we want everyone to vote? Don't you think it's stupid that everybody votes, Rob?
Yeah,
I think it's a bad idea on its face, isn't it?
I think that there should be some discrimination in who's allowed to vote, but that shouldn't be based on characteristics such as immutable characteristics.
Why? So what would you base it on? That wouldn't be immutable.
So it could be things like some small amount of education. It could hypothetically be things like landowner and things of that nature. But even that, I would be reticent. For me, I think that there should be small impetus being placed on that's hard to quantify, but I would start in quantifying it like this. You have to be able to appear in person election day to cast your ballot then. That gets out the problem we have of disinterested voters. We can't.
Why do we want stupid people to vote?
I agree. Culturally, we don't want that, but we shouldn't have a law that says stupid people can't vote.
Yeah, but that's immutable.
Right. I just said that, therefore, I would be against a law saying stupid people can't.
The thing about stupid people to vote is that that's unmeasurable. So, for instance, I can meet someone that's in an industry or something, right? That's let's say, I don't know. Let's say someone's a plumber, right? A plumber, and let's say I talk to this plumber, and the plumber is not really knowledgeable in history or math or something like that. Let's say they're not really smart in those areas. However, they're really good plumbers. And there's a law or a measure that's going to come out that could affect the plumbing industry or plumbers. Don't you think that plumbers should have a right to have a say in what goes? Don't you think that plumber should be able to have a say in something that affects his industry? I think the problem is that you have people voting on things that they have no real knowledge on. And I think that's the issue. And I think in terms of that, we should find some way to limit that. You have people who have no connection to farming voting on farming issues. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, how come I have a say in what goes on in farming when I have nothing to do with farming? Shouldn't that be left up to the farmers?
Vote.
Yeah, but why? Why is that in our interest to let stupid people vote, even if they can't help being stupid?
Because we should not say that certain people don't have access to the same sorts of rights based on immutable characteristics. If we inevitably go down this path, what we'll see is it'll become more and more finite until eventually you'll be saying only people that agree with me should be the people that are allowed to make decisions based on the direction this country is
going. Well, why
going.
can't we make justifications on some immutable characteristics and not others?
What's your criteria for doing so?
Or even bad? Well, for instance...
What's your criteria?
For instance... if we did it along intelligence lines, if we said that somebody was actually too stupid to be able to vote, this would not actually go against anything that would be against gender or sex or color or ethnicity or any of these types of things, right? Where's the actual discrimination? We have to discriminate at least a little bit in society to have a functional society. That has to be done. For instance, why shouldn't a 16-year-old vote? That's an immutable characteristic, Rob. Why shouldn't a 10-year-old be able to vote? That's an immutable characteristic, Rob.
These sorts of immutable characteristics are different because there's something that all people will eventually overcome unless they tragically die early. So, for example, we could say,
not stupidity.
Right. Well, the stupidity, that's different. Like, how do you measure? That's one thing. But nonetheless, if I can finish this point, quickly,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
Right? The point is, so like saying that you have to be 18 to vote is different than saying black people can't vote. It is fundamentally different in ways that if you'd like, we could get into why it's fundamentally different. But one is, based on the way you were born, you will never be able to receive these rights. And the other is, we have as a society determined that there are maturity levels that are different with people that until they reach a certain age. It's the same reason we say that it is
totally
immoral and illegal to have sex with the 14.
They're arbitrary. They're completely arbitrary.
That's true, but that's the nature of government.
Arbitrary.
That's the nature of government.
So why is it again that you say these immutable characteristics are not okay? For instance, let me give you an example of this. Someone at 17 years and 9 months versus somebody who's 18 years old. What's the real fucking difference in them voting?
It's not, but when we're a nation and we're creating laws, right? You could go further. You sound like Vosh, right? So we could go further. You're right, Andrew. The good progressive you are. Everything is a social construct, right? There is no definition of what an 18-year-old is. If a 13 feels like they're 18, then aren't they? Are you going to tell us next that it's okay to have sex with 13-year-olds? Go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead. Tell us why pedophilia is legit.
When did I say a word about social construction?
That's what you're implying. You're saying that
arbitrary.
Right?
No, none of these are social constructions.
Okay.
I'm just saying that this is an arbitrary factor.
Then it's the same argument that the social constructionist theories say, which is to say everything is arbitrary because it was all created by society. Therefore, we shouldn't take any of these things seriously. You're literally giving the justification for having sex with 13-year-olds right now.
Nope. I'm just asking you what your justification is for 17 years old, 9 months versus 18-year-olds to vote.
My justification is that laws will always never be perfect. There will always be infringements. For example, we would say that theft is wrong. It's wrong to steal. But is it morally wrong if your family's starving to death and someone's holding you at gunpoint and you have to steal? Right? Well, you could say that, but the nature of the law is we have to say that it's illegal. I wouldn't say that that's morally wrong. I would say that it's okay to steal an apple to feed someone who's starving to death.
Here's the problem with your entire epistemology with this, right? Is that you can say it's both. You can say, look, it is still wrong that he stole, even though we can still grant a huge amount of leniency to it because we can understand the circumstances in which he stole, but it's still a moral wrong. It's still not correct that he stole.
Well, maybe, but it's less wrong.
These are universal. Now, when we're talking about things like age of consent, I can give you biblical justifications for it.
What is the age then?
The age of consent biblically is right around 19 years old.
So you're saying I don't consider myself to be a scholar of the Bible. So people could check into this, but you're telling me that the people portrayed within the Bible, not Jesus obviously, who wasn't involved in those sorts of relationships, but the apostles and others, even in the New Testament, were only engaged in intercourse when married after the age of 19.
No, that's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that I can at least base a justification for what I think the correct age is. Based on biblical text, let's say. There has to be some sort of justification for why you think it should be 18, right? Other than you just say this is arbitrary and I just think it should be because I think it should be.
Well, no, the age of 18 is something, I don't necessarily agree that the voting age should be 18, to be honest.
What should it be?
But inevitably it will have some sense of arbitrariness, right? Because there are 16-year-olds that have higher IQs and are more worldly and more mature than some 25-year-olds. But it's impossible to create a system that says this is what the law will be, that says, well, the 16-year-old can vote because he's mature and he's exhibited greatness on an IQ test, but the 25-year-old has exhibited, he goes out and plays beer pong every week and is running around, streaking through the quad, so therefore he's not mature enough to vote. That's bullshit. Laws have to be set.
Understand. Wait, back up. Try to understand that it wouldn't have mattered what I said the justification in the Bible was for the actual age of consent. All that matters is that I can give you an example of some kind of justification. Let's say that my church authority said it was 12. Let's say they said it was 20. Let's say they said it was 30. That's still justified. There's something from which I can derive that from. You, though, it's totally arbitrary. You have no actual idea why the age should be 18.
No, that's not true. For sexual consent?
Why it shouldn't be.
For sexual consent or for voting? Okay, for sexual consent because we look at what we consider an average age of sexual and societal maturity.
What does that mean? That doesn't mean anything. You're just stringing a bunch of bullshit together.
Do you know what puberty is? I know,
sure.
I know that as someone who's still chain smoking like a hip 14-year-old, that maybe this has eluded you, right? But we
Listen. This is advice for anyone that debates Andrew Wilson. The you smoke a lot argument is not an argument. And I feel that whenever someone goes for the smoking, it kind of shows that they're kind of losing a little bit. I wonder if that's some 4D chess on Andrew Wilson's part. I don't know.
Understand that there are markers that people advance with sexual maturation through things like puberty. There's also societal maturation. For example, we could see that there are actual tests that are able to do that. I think that people aren't fully mature societally until like age 25 or something like that. But there are measurements that people have taken. Now, I can't sit here and tell you exactly what those tests fulfill, but as a society, we could see that there is something on average when people reach the end of traditional schooling, 17, 18-year-olds, that they're much more mature than people even a year or two younger than them.
And so we have a single one of those metrics because it's all bullshit. What's a single one of those metrics that we would appeal to?
Risk evaluation. Risk evaluation.
That a 17-year-old's going to have a harder time with a pregnancy than an 18-year-old? There's no greater risk there?
An 18-year-old understands risk better than a 14-year-old on average.
So a 24-year-old also understands risk better than an 18-year-old.
That's absolutely true.
So why are we doing the arbitrary? It's an arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary.
No which way you could
say
it.
No. You could say that it's arbitrary in which date that you choose, but it's not arbitrary in the metrics that we're using to evaluate it. There is a sliding scale. Now,
Give me something then.
That's the metric I'm giving you, right?
Okay.
Now, personally, The metric I'm giving you is sexual maturity through going through puberty and things like that. When your body becomes into adulthood, it is more sexually mature, and societal maturity. And 18 years sounds like a pretty good metric, although there are people that will be sexually mature before that and people that are sexually mature after that.
Andrew's face like, wait, what? There's going to be people sexually mature before that? He's still not giving a metric, though. He's just saying societally, 18 sounds about right. By what metric, though? Why does it sound about right? Does it sound that way just because we've kind of grown up in this society where we've already deemed it that you're mature when you're 18? Is that why it sounds good?
And societally mature, we have to put a hard date on it because that's how laws in society work. Now, I understand that you're controlling this conversation, but let's take it the other direction, right? So first, a couple questions I have for you. First, if your religious leader tells you it's okay to have sex with a 12-year-old, you're doing so unquestioningly, correct?
Of course not.
Well, you just said that would be a standard.
It could be a standard, at least a justification. Doesn't mean it's correct.
Right. So then what's your metric for sex?
It just means that there's at least a justification there.
So give me your metric. Why then the justification? Right. There's a justification. What I'm saying too. There's still an arbitrary.
No,
sure, there is.
Saying it's completely arbitrary. And
I'm not.
It at all.
I gave
Same
metrics.
thing with,
right?
And the reason that we bring this up isn't because I wanted to explore what the maturity of a woman should be before she's allowed to have sex, but rather to draw attention to the fact that the voting age itself is totally arbitrary. If we raised it to 25, why would that be problematic? If we eliminated a woman's right to vote, why exactly is that problematic? You say, well, it's because it's an immutable characteristic that they're a woman, but why ought we not take some immutable characteristics and discriminate against them? That seems plausible, and like it's actually a good idea. The same reason that an immutable characteristic like stupidity, I might discriminate against that, because stupid people should not be governing society, Rob.
So Andrew Wilson very wisely steered the conversation away from the age of consent stuff, because Andrew Wilson admitted right there that even if there's justification, Andrew Wilson just admitted that even if there were justification that you should, go with a 12-year-old, that he would not follow it because that would be wrong. The thing is, though, is if we're going by Bible standards, though, are we getting to the territory where we're picking and choosing what sounds right for us in the Bible? And it could have easily led him into an area of really debating the meat of why we should go with Christian authoritarianism. However, he steered it away, and now he has it back on track to the voting age.
It has nothing to do with just governing, right? And how do you define what's stupid? Inevitably, you'll have an arbitrary measure, right? You might say, I think your IQ has to be 110.
I can use an empirical measurement.
But that's exactly what I'm doing. You could use an empirical.
You haven't given a single empirical metric for why you think
that's not. The empirical measurement in the science that you want me to have a study, like all of you good lefties do, right? You need me to have a source that says this scientist in this study said that the sexual maturity of 18-year-olds.
Give me any metric. That's
I did give you a metric, and it talked about the average age of sexual maturity and social maturity and the levels that we see.
Average age?
18
of sexual maturity. That's not
but
the average age of sexual maturity.
Well, no.
Like,
you're right. Let me backtrack, right?
Okay.
You're right. Those are the reasons I'm giving for setting a threshold, but the actual threshold of being 18 would obviously be something that anyone would be able to say would be arbitrary. The same as in every empirical argument you're giving, why age of consent should be 19, why voting age could be 18 or could be 25, why white people should be allowed to vote but not black people. All of this, although based on some sort of empiric idea, will be arbitrary on the scale of that empiricism.
Okay, so can I provide then, if I provide a specific justification, if I say to you, Rob, within your worldview and my worldview, do you agree with me that stupid people voting generally is probably bad for society?
It depends on how we define stupid, but if we're being
just
charitable,
on average,
right?
I would say that you and I aren't both idiots and we know what stupid means. Right?
Yes, I would say on net that would probably be bad.
Okay, yeah, on net that would probably be bad. So it's not desirable. So why do we do it?
Because
other than this
what's the
bizarre
alternative?
Sense of we need to be fair. Why can't we discriminate against stupid people voting? Why can't we eliminate people from the voting pool who we don't think would be good for running the country and should not have a say in running the country? Maybe they, like you said, they don't have enough skin in the game, for instance. Maybe We discriminate against their voting rights because based on patterns before, they've led us down the primrose path to destruction. There's all kinds of different determining ways, but how about this? How about a way that you could do it, Starship Trooper rules, right? Where service guarantees citizenship. How about 10 years of your life? 10 years of your life devoted to the state, and then we let you vote.
But those are immutable. That's a different type of argument, which I'm willing to have. And I do think that there's interesting theories as to perhaps some form of public service or some sort of skin in the game should be necessary to vote. I don't know that that's I think that me saying that metric should be very low and should be in person same day voting, I think gets rid of a lot of these, what I call disinterested voters. But the problem is that the alternative is worse because, for example, I think that you agree with me when I talk about corruption in the halls of power in our institutions today. And once you justify saying, look, there are certain people that are good for society and only they should have a voice, those people will say, we absolutely agree with you, Andrew, and you're not in that group. See ya.
Yeah, but
it's our group.
Nobody has to take responsibility in democracy, man. They don't have to. They go in, they can fuck everything up, and they say, well, I was voted in here to do this job. I was voted in here to make sure that your taxes are higher and that we can fuck you as much as we possibly can. I was voted in here to do that, even though they weren't voted in to do that at all, not even a little bit. What's happened is people have figured out that they can rob our own treasury blind. And the way that they rob our treasury blind is they vote in a cocksucker who goes in and gives them all kinds of money and benefits and everything that they want just based on their fucking majority. It's insanity.
There are problems. That is absolutely.
You're saying to me, no, Andrew, that's perfectly okay because I don't want to discriminate. No, fuck that, man. I want
that's not what I'm saying.
Out of office now.
I talk about those problems a lot. The problem is you would entrench them because this class has all kinds. For example, you can see it right now. They constantly use the term education. They say the people that vote against this system tend to be less educated. And so if you had forth a new system that said only the people that are in the upper echelons, we're going to go from a country that was focused on the individual to going back to a class-based system. And we'll have some metric that says you have to be in this upper tier class to have a voice in what happens in society, and the rest of the people don't. The problem is those in positions of authority right now will say, absolutely, we agree with that. And people like Rob Noer and Casimir and Andrew no longer are part of that. And so now they're beholden to what we say. And you would wail and gnash your teeth and say it's not fair. But I have a quick question that I want to get to you.
Wait, hang on. I got to respond to that. We can't just say we refuse to exercise power because one day you might. That's insane too, Rob. Yeah, it is what you're saying. You're saying if we do this now and it's good for us and it's good for society, we got to be really careful because they might get power later and then they might use that system against us. That is exactly how we're trained like fucking monkeys in the political arena in order to let our rulers divide us. And what they do is they say, we have to take this path of egalitarianism and bullshit because if we don't do that, then later on, these people might get power and then we're fucked. That's bullshit across the board.
But it's bullshit that's proven out by it's.
Listen, obviously Andrew is correct about the people who get elected in and then start robbing us blind or not fulfilling their promises. But a problem is that I think it's still important to define, well, what's a smart person, what's a dumb person? Because here's the thing, even if we were to use this metric of like, no, stupid people could vote, right? Smart people can still be manipulated. Politicians can still manipulate people into voting them in. So I don't know. I mean, I just think it's kind of important to maybe define that. What a stupid person is, what a smart person is, what does it mean to be a smart voter? I don't know. It's just something to think about, I guess.
Bullshit that's proven out by history. Like you're advocating for the yes, it is. You're advocating for the noble authoritarian, and to say that we shouldn't look to see how that could quickly go off the rails as we've seen it occur through history is bullshit. Now, my question to you is, can you explain to the audience why you think it would be good to not have black people vote?
I didn't say it would be.
But why?
Why what? What's the justification?
Why should we not be? We should be allowed to discriminate who votes based on sex, but not based on race. Can you explain why?
So, can you define for me what black is?
Yeah, we'll go with the ethnicity.
Yeah, I don't know what that means. What is black?
Okay, black would be people that are traditionally have the skin color that's associated with what we consider black. Would you like me to define man and woman for you as well?
I mean, not yet, but I can do that.
You need help with that? You wanted me to show you that Matt Walsh documentary?
it's important that I know what black means, because I know what no arm means. No arm means guy who has no arm, right? I can clearly see that metric. Black is a self-identifier, though. It's not an ethnicity. It's a self-identification. It's an empty label. So if I say what is black and you say a black person is someone who's black, it's a reference to itself. It's regressive. So when I'm asking you,
I mean, yeah, it's not really complicated, because here's the thing is there are people who are like super tanned who I thought were black and they weren't. Or I thought that there were people who were of a different, dark-skinned race that were black and they weren't. They were like, and also there are light-skinned people who also look like light-skinned black. So yes, it's important to, so this isn't like Rob Noer's trying to like make Andrew Wilson look stupid here, but no, Andrew Wilson, actually, that's a valid question. Like, what do you define as black? Because it can mean a lot of things. Do you mean African American? Like, because it could mean a few different things.
So, okay, so if you would like me to get specific, I forget what the term of this is, but we have three like predominant phenotypes of ethnicity. So we have Caucasoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid. So
he said Caucasoid.
You explain to me why we shouldn't be allowed to discriminate based on that, but we should be allowed based on biological sex.
Well, you would have to give me an argument for why we should.
Why should we, based on biological sex?
Based on biological sex, do what? Eliminate
discriminate
voting?
And say that women can't vote.
Well, so there's several arguments that I can give, but the simple one is, why ought we?
What do you mean, why ought we?
Well, why ought we let women vote?
Because we should not discriminate based on people we're born.
So, like, I'm neutral. I'm neutral on the topic. Let's just say I'm neutral on the topic of women voting. Why ought we let them vote?
For the same reason we ought to let men vote.
Well, that doesn't. Well, what is that reason?
Again, like, it is because we assume that there is a baseline that everyone is entitled to equal treatment, barring some reason to not entitle them to that equal treatment. So the impetus is on you to say why the status quo should be changed.
So hang on. So we're back to egalitarianism. Why should I accept egalitarian? You're just justifying the thing with the thing. I say, why ought we do that? And you say, because we ought be equal, saying the same thing. It's regressive.
But again, I could use, and that's what proves that you would be for the arbitrary based on what your whims are of that day. Saying that certain people, I'm giving you specifics. I'm saying the default should be, if there are two groups and you say one group is entitled to X and the other group is not entitled to X, the impetus is on you to say why that group's not entitled to X. Otherwise, if the impetus, and let me explain why, because otherwise you justify every sort of heinous treatment possible in the world, because you say it is up to each individual. You should have to prove why you shouldn't be raped. Prove it.
That's some leftist shit right there.
No, it's not.
Let me explain this one more time. Right? You say to me, Andrew, why shouldn't women be able to vote? And I say, well, okay, I'm neutral on it. Let's just say that they could or they couldn't. Give me the odd reason why they should. And you say, because my default is that everybody be treated equally. But you haven't justified that default. Why should people be treated equally? This is the whole circularity of your entire argument.
It's not. Your argument
then why should they be treated equally? Why?
Because if we have a system that allows arbitrary mistreatment of people without proving the reason why based on immutable characteristics, you justify any sort of heinous humanization of them, including rape and murder. Why shouldn't we be allowed to murder women?
So your justification for why we ought to treat everybody equal is because you're afraid of the consequences of not doing that might be bad.
Well, that's better than your justification, which is trying to pretend that you're some sort of intellectual by answering questions with questions. That's right. That's all you do. You avoid the question by attempting to control the conversation by answering questions with questions. Again, the impetus is on you. The impetus is on you if you want to treat two different groups differently to explain why they deserve to be treated differently.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think that you can be neutral on a topic, right?
Yes.
And ask the other person if they can justify why it is that you ought to do something, and then they give you an answer to that, and you go, okay, well, that's not very convincing to me. In this particular question,
I think it's
of
very
women's
convincing.
Suffrage, you go, okay, well, I'm neutral on it. Why should we do it? You say that the whole justification revolves around the fact that you think that there might be an entailment of consequences, but you can't demonstrate any of those consequences because you have those same consequences whether the women vote or they don't vote, or black people vote or don't vote. You're going to have those same consequences. We don't even know the degree of which we'll have them. So the thing is like, if you want me to take an affirmative position, tell you why I think women shouldn't be able to vote, I can give you a whole host of my own personal justifications for them. If you want to take the neutral position, that's fine. Here's why they shouldn't vote, Rob, just so I'm not answering a question with a question. Because on average, they're too fucking stupid to exercise authority. That's why they shouldn't vote.
So Andrew Wilson is 100% correct on what he just said. Like, listen, for me personally, like, listen, I'm 41 years old. So I grew up in this timeline where, you know, everyone gets to vote when you're 18. I know no other system. I know no other way of doing things. It's just been ingrained to me by the society that I grew up in that no, we should all be able to vote at 18 no matter what. And the only things you have to do in return is that you have to enlist in the draft. But the thing is that watching these debates and watching these conversations happen, the reason why Andrew Wilson is more persuasive is because he does actually give arguments. You ask him, why don't you think all women should vote? He could give you actual answers on the decline of how pretty much, you know, I'm summarizing Andrew's position from what I've heard is that, you know, women vote for pretty much things that kind of are detrimental to society based on their emotions and their feelings. You know, I hope I'm steel manning on him on that, but that's my understanding from watching these debates. But he actually gives reasons. He's like, look, listen, everything's on a decline here in society, and it's because women tend to vote for things that are harmful. So now I've heard that argument, and now I'm looking to Rob Noer and I'm like, okay, well, why should women vote? And basically his answer is just, I just think they should. Like, because of equality. And because, well, if we don't allow them to vote, then pretty much Handmaid's Tale, which absolutely is a leftist argument. That is what the progressives and the lefties argue. So I hear Rob Noer's argument, and I hear Andrew Wilson's argument, and I say, well, listen, normally, yes, I think because of the society I grew up on, I think everyone should be able to vote when they're 18. However, now that I've seen Andrew Wilson's arguments, and he actually gives arguments of why they shouldn't, and Rob Noer didn't really deliver any arguments of why they should, other than they just should. Well, now I'm here as a viewer watching this, and I'm thinking, well, maybe what I believe in doesn't really hold true. This is all due to the society I grew up in, because every time people try to argue with Andrew of why women should be able to vote on these things, they can't give good odds other than equality. So now I'm sitting here thinking, maybe Andrew's onto something. Maybe Andrew's correct. I don't really have strong feelings on women shouldn't vote, but I don't have strong feelings to why they shouldn't vote. So I am the neutral viewer right now that Andrew's talking about. So if there are no champions, if there's no one that could argue why they should be able to do that, well, as a neutral viewer, I start to think, well, maybe there is no reason for it. Maybe we just are, as a society, are just based on the feminism of equality. We just should. I thought Rob Noer did a pretty solid job here. I don't think he won this debate, at least from, this is a little over 3-hour debate, and we're only 48 minutes into it. If you want to see the full debate yourself, you can. I'll have a link in the description below. It's on Rob Noer's channel. I highly suggest you subscribe to his channel. I know I have. But what did you guys think about this debate? Sound off in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel if you really enjoyed this content. And if you did enjoy this content, I got much more debates. I got some Rob Noer, and I got a lot of Andrew Wilson on my channel, and a whole bunch more stuff that I think you'll enjoy.